Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, we have a few questions regarding the amendment of the budget statements of the Ministry of Health and the accompanying report. We read on page 25 that the budget will be increased by €18.4 million in 2026 and €18.9 million in 2027 in connection with the implementation of the Open Government Act and the Parliamentary inquiry into Corona. Can the Minister explain why these costs turn out to be significantly higher? After all, we are talking here about tens of millions of euros more than was initially budgeted. That is our first question, Chair. And the second question, how much is the Ministry reserving in the coming years for the payment of penalty payments? Because WOO requests were not granted by the Ministry on time at the beginning of last year. Chair HET Perul wrote the following about this, and I quote, "Altogether, the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport has paid €677,000 in penalty payments. For these still unresolved requests, this emerges from an analysis by the AMP of information that the Ministry of the Interior has shared with the House of Representatives." End of quote. Why? Third question. Where is that stated? Excuse me, that is our third question. Is the counting now up to date when it comes to those penalty payments? So, how much has the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport paid in penalty payments over the past year because the WOB requests were not fulfilled on time? In the report, Chair, we read that several parties have asked the government why there is nothing in the spring memorandum about alternative funding regarding the €300 million cut on pandemic preparedness that was included in the coalition agreement but has now been cancelled. The Minister informed the House on February 3rd, in response to parliamentary questions, that more would be known about this around mid-2025, but so far that has not been the case. Hence my fourth question, how will the €300 million cut on pandemic preparedness in 2029, a cut that was included in the outline agreement, be handled? It was in there, but now it has been cancelled. Will it be covered, for example, by making cuts in elderly care, or will the personal contribution perhaps be increased? We would like to hear about it. The main question, and this really is the main question, Chair, is of course, why? Why was the €300 million cut on pandemic preparedness reversed at all? How is that possible? This cut was, in fact, explicitly, Chair, stated in the outline agreement of May 15, 2024. I quote, that was point 31. The increase in public health spending will be structurally reduced by €300 million over time. End of quote. So that was in the outline agreement, and the outline agreement, Chair, is usually considered sacred, right? Minister Ajma also supported this cut. So why was it decided to abandon this cut? On this matter, the government wrote the following on October 16, 2024, in response to question 238 from the House about the draft 2025 budget of the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport. I quote again, in the coalition agreement, a reduction was agreed upon for the increase in public health and infection control spending, rising to a structural €300 million. This reduction is related to the Pandemic Preparedness Policy Programme, in which, among other things, the lessons from the coronavirus crisis are translated into policy. For 2025, the cut has been implemented in policy terms, which has been done with €50 million. For 2026 and beyond, it will be examined how the cut relates to the broader resilience task facing the cabinets, which will be further developed in the coming period under the direction of the National Coordinator for Counterterrorism and Security, the NCTV. End of quote. That's strange. A €300 million cut included in the outline agreement is being reversed as part of a government-wide resilience task under the direction of the NCTV. How is that possible? Since when does the NCTV determine our healthcare policy and not Parliament? On October 24, 2024, during the VWS budget debate, the truth came out, Chair. And by the way, we can thank Ms. Polazma for that, because she asked a good question about this. Minister Ajma stated no less than 7 times during that debate, and then repeatedly again in interviews and in response to parliamentary questions, so this was not a slip of the tongue, that she had to reverse this €300 million cut on pandemic preparedness because of, and I quote, NATO obligations in the area of resilience. NATO obligations, Chair, which the government has now informed us through the Minister of Defence and Justice are, in fact, classified. They are completely classified, even for the Committee on Security and Intelligence Services, because they are NATO classified. So also for the House of Representatives, since it is not the government but NATO that determines their confidentiality. Hopefully I don't need to explain, Chair, just how concerning all of this is. A democratically legitimized budget cut on healthcare, mind you, Chair, we're not talking about buying tanks and ammunition here, is being explicitly reversed under pressure from secret NATO obligations that the House knows nothing about, let alone has ever agreed to, which is simply impossible. This is a major issue against the wishes of the Minister of Health, who is now suddenly faced with an unexpected budget cut of €300 million. In the debate on October 24th, she said about this, and I'll quote her again, "I'll have to deal with that." This is a quote from the previous Minister of Health, and I'll have to find a solution for it. That's what Minister Ajma said, because we are bound by NATO obligations. At this moment, under the direction of the NCTV, an inventory is being made of everything that needs to be done. End of quote. And in the debate on December 19th, 2024, the minister stated, and I'll quote another sentence, "I also still have to find €300 million for pandemic preparedness. It's a very complicated exercise. It's not a walk in the park." End of quote. Obligations must be met. Complicated. Not a walk in the park. So to summarize, Chair, the Minister of Health apparently feels compelled, seemingly against her will, to abandon a cutback on pandemic preparedness, which, mind you, was included in the main agreement as a result of the elections and negotiations. And this is apparently due to secret NATO obligations that the House knows nothing about, let alone has ever approved. Obligations that, as the government has now informed us, I'm quoting from the answer to parliamentary questions here, are politically binding for the government. Politically binding. We don't know what it is, but it's politically binding. This is a gaping black hole at the heart of our democracy, Chair. Apparently, our government is not only bound by the main coalition agreement that was established through elections and is therefore democratically legitimized, but our government also seems to be bound by a secret coalition agreement with NATO. And when push comes to shove, that secret coalition agreement with NATO, this example I'm bringing up now shows, is actually the guiding principle for the government. Or so it seems. Or not. That is the question now. Because in a recent debate, Chair, the Minister of Justice stated that NATO obligations would not be legally binding and that ministers can make their own decisions. But the withdrawn cut to pandemic preparedness and the way the Minister for Health has spoken about it suggests the opposite. Therefore, Chair, I would like to ask the Minister for Health. This is very important and my most urgent question in this debate. Who, presumably at least the NCTV. At what times and in what way was the Minister informed between her appointment on July 2nd, 2024, and the VWS budget debate on October 24th, 2024, about the NATO obligations regarding pandemic preparedness? Last week, Chair, I already informed the Ministry that I would be raising these issues. So I expect that the Minister will be able to provide a detailed answer to this during her turn later on. Finally, I would like to ask the Minister, as the successor in office, whether she could send to Parliament as much as possible of the written information her predecessor received about the secret NATO obligations, including the resilience tasks specified by the NCTV in the area of VWS in general and pandemic preparedness in particular unredacted, so that Parliament can verify. That is very important, Chair, that the way in which the Minister has been informed about these NATO obligations in the area of resilience, at least by the NCTV, as we understand it, has indeed, as the Minister of Justice emphatically claims, been non-binding in the form of a best efforts obligation and not mandatory, as the statement on this matter by the Minister for Health herself seems to suggest. So we want to know who, at least when it comes to this cutback on pandemic preparedness, is ultimately in charge and directing the Minister, this Parliament and thus the Dutch people, or NATO. We look forward to the Minister's response. Chair, thank you.
Van Houwelingen on explaining the negotiation of a coalition agreement in relation to secret NATO objectives. Those in favour, SP, DENK, Forum for Democracy, rejected. 36. Van Houwelingen on letting the wishes of the House of Representatives prevail over secret NATO objectives. Those in favour, SP, Party for the Animals, DENK, Forum for Democracy.